Hello class, this is Mr. Harney. I am going to go over the hermeneutics for the new history in this lecture. I will begin with some quotes from some very famous authors and scholars on failure and success and how we can learn from it. And I'll then go into the hermeneutics of the new history. It's an interpretive methodology that is important for scholarship. And then after that, I will go into what I call the Historia Introductio, which is an introduction to history. So, with that being said, we learn from both failure and success. The wisest man is one who looks within to embrace what he is becoming, to learn from where he has been. Quote, "Not everything can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted." End quote. That is from Albert Einstein. Quote, "The fundamental cause of trouble in the world is that the stupid are too sure while the intelligent are too full of doubt." End quote. That is from Bertrand Russell. Quote, "Good people do not need laws to act responsibly. The bad people will always find a way around the laws." End quote. That is from Plato. Quote, "History has demonstrated that the most notable winners encounter heartbreaking obstacles before they triumphed. They won because they refused to become discouraged by their defeats." End quote. That is by B.C. Forbes. Quote, "Be more concerned with your character than your reputation, because your character is what you really are, while your reputation is merely what others think you are." End quote. And that is from J. Wooden. All right, hermeneutics for the new history. New history will be in a separate video. So historical insights are based on Gadamer. Gadamer was a writer in hermeneutics, and he was born in 1900 and he died in 2002 CE. And Ricoeur as well. He also existed mainly in the 20th century, and I do believe that he might have lived a little bit shorter life than Gadamer. So truth communicated by the experience of history cannot be verified by the methodologies of natural science. That is quite plain. But what kind of knowledge and truth is it that hermeneutics, the endeavor of interpretation and understanding, can attain? The knowledge of truth that resides in understanding. That is the answer. Quote, "A deeper investigation of the phenomenon of understanding is strengthened and legitimized by the fact that the truth in any historical text," end quote, written by any historical thinker, quote, "can only be known by an interpretive method, not a scientific method," end quote. That is from Gadamer. And the same is true of art. Nothing quantitative can replace this experience, an insistent admonition to acknowledge the limitations of human expression and explanation. The same is true of history. Humans are now historical beings, and as such, the possibility of history or inquiry requires the fact that I am a historical human. The one who studies history is the one who writes it. And that comes from Ricoeur, or no, I think it comes from Delphi. It comes from Delphi, another writer on hermeneutics. I want to give him credit for that. So that the art of interpreting text brings both ontology and history together in order to show that it is through the invention of language and the historical context of interpretive method that humanity is explained. We understand the internal consciousness of humans by means of their external manifestations. Languages, writings, behaviors, productions, and actions. It is the task of the philosopher, not the historian, to discover the very structure of human understanding, without which the actual theories and methods of interpretation would not exist. And so historians are indebted to philosophy, as well as psychologists are indebted to to philosophy, rather. Human beings are, in the most basic aspects of their nature, constitutively given to understanding. to comprehension and to determine the capacities and limitations of this endowment. Behind each and every thought of the human mind resides a plethora of assumptions and background beliefs, i.e. prejudice. Some we might keep and some we might reject, due to their individual merits. They must stand on their individual merits. But these inherited beliefs, or former ones, are a source of knowledge, and our faculty of reason assigns to understanding the task of evaluating prejudices and critiquing ideologies, as well as the authority and the tradition that constitute them. The process of understanding any text is historical. And therefore crucial for any historian is the concept of the limit of knowledge, and that humans are linguistic creatures. Indeed, humans cannot be completely free from the past. Far from that. The past provides the actual starting point for the process of understanding. These principal themes contribute to education, ideals, the humanities, and the mutual understanding between different cultures and their individual contexts. The main aim of interpretive method is to understand differences and challenges between the present time and the time of the cultures of the past. Time and the time of the cultures of the past, and this is implicitly the understanding of ourselves by means of understanding those who have existed before our time. Existents express themselves and arrive at meaning by the continual activity of interpreting the signs through which culture manifests itself and by the products it produces. Obviously, we don't know what culture is, we only know it by the things which it produces. And so as being a being who reflects and not introspects concerning who and what they are, we now recognize ourselves as physical, social, and linguistic unities. We live a narrative in time, and the way in which humans experience time is what makes possible the reflectiveness required for discovery. Phenomenological time, or time from past through the present towards the future, and cosmological time, the abstract concept of time, because to understand an actual definition of time, we would have to get outside of time, which we cannot do, and therefore we must have an abstract conception of time. But human time is required in order to be understood in narrative terminology, the story of the historian in which we are characters being written and read by ourselves. The highest values are friendship and justice, which protect human identity when it is lost, and provide for its repair and restoration, an attractive and humane approach to life. So, there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm not going to do it. I am going to go into Historia Introductio. C.H. Harney, M.A. historian, and I'm currently working on my PhD in psychology. This was written in honor of Pausanias, Varro, Seneca, Cicero, Phaedrus, Philo, Antiochus, Lucretius, Vivuvius, Celsus, Pliny the Elder, and Martianus Capella, ancient writers from the Greek and the Roman worlds of classical antiquity, from which, if I were to quote Thomas Jefferson, it is that world of classical antiquity that we ourselves need to understand if we are to break away from the formal dogmas that have held us back from progressing as a human species. I begin by saying that one is always in debt to countless philosophers and historians who have helped to educate by their inquiries and conversations. Here they stop at the crossroads of time to inquire enigmatically how humans have arisen from an instinctual life of nature to the consciousness of a historical being. It is true that the central speculative effort has been to explain the origin and development of humankind as a cultural or historical animal. What Darwin did for the physical evolution of humans and other animals, speculators on history, philosophers of history, like Vico, Condorcet, Hegel, Kant, Marx, Freud, attempted to do so for Homo culturus. Imprecise and vague, the aim of their findings and theories were exemplary. for it is largely by the flickering lights of the past that we perceive and define our present identities and future prospects. Indeed, I will further clarify in Historia Conclusio, which I have not written yet, the implications and applications of history and psychology in relation to a detailed refinement of human consciousness. Marx abandoned Hegel's idealistic explanation for the rise of primate consciousness and offered a materialistic one in its place. But it would be left to Freud, with his concern for the unconscious as well as the conscious, to answer the dilemma of human existence. For our human fate does not require that we blind ourselves to or be blinded by the knowledge vouchsafed to us as a human species. Our present knowledge is only partial, but a single unified solution will be reached only by those who demand of true knowledge, of science, final answers, rather than tentative attempts to answer key questions concerning complicated and complex phenomena, natural or historical. For hypotheses concerning the data of history lead to further empirical inquiries and theoretical formulations concerning a more scientific comprehension of the human past. This writing is a psychological history of the philosophy of history in its modern period, presenting the insights of two approaches, namely the speculative, or the meaning of history, the semiotics thereof, and the critical, the epistemology, theory of knowledge, and logic of history, in order to perceive with the senses in the data of history the origins of the human sciences. I am concerned with critical philosophers of history such as Dilthey, which I have mentioned earlier, and historicism in terms of the humanist of the 16th century and that of the 19th century, i.e. Ranke and Burckhardt, to name a few. But I also focus on the great speculative thinkers of history, the classical modern philosophers of history, who are mainly from Italy, France, Germany, and England, who each have their own unique histories, all their own. However, I here recommend that one see the complete works of Vico, Hegel, Comte, Marx, Spengler, Toynbee, and Freud. It may be to the surprise of many readers that the founder of psychoanalysis is in the historical tradition of Auguste Comte, Hegel, and especially that of Vico. He wrote The New Science. So, major questions concerning the direction of history. Are humans evolving towards greater freedom, i.e. Immanuel Kant's moral freedom, Hegel's freedom to be rational, or Marx's freedom from alienation? Toward equality of a social, economic, or political nature? Toward a new religion, as in Toynbee? Or toward the complete displacement of the religious illusion by scientific truth, as in Comte, Marx, and Freud? Is history progressive? Is culture cumulative? Or are there different cultures, as Spengler thought, which usually flourish and then die in isolation? What exactly is the major force at work in history? Is it reason, as Hegel suggested, realizing its potential as actual? Is it the economical conditions of production, as Marx proclaimed, determining, conditioning, and influencing the rest of humanity's historical experience in the world? Are central characters in history individual heroes, nations, or the gods, as Vico thought? How are the stages or periods, as in the geological or cosmological timescales that we've discussed, of history to be distinguished? Are there ages of gods, heroes, and men, as Vico thought, or stages, as in the progress towards the French Enlightenment of the 18th century, as Condorcet contended that there were 10? So, how do these divisions affect or reflect the meaning and direction of history? Quote, this is from E.H. Carr in What is History? A New York publication, page 76, 1962 CE. Quote, the division of history into periods is not a fact, but a necessary tool of thought, valid insofar as it is dependent for its validity and interpretation. End quote. Other themes consider Voltaire's notion that, quote, man makes his history, end quote, and the connection of this notion with pragmatism, the related idea that, quote, man has no nature, he has only his history. That is from the Spanish philosopher Ortega y Gasset. But the concept of unintended consequence and the notion of complexified and diversified cultures and what is normally called cultural wholes. So, on the critical side, as opposed to a speculative one, the fundamental inquiry is, how can we or how do we know any of the answers to any of the questions that I have previously mentioned? So what is the epistemology? What is the logic of the discipline of history? Do humans start from John Locke's empiricism or Immanuel Kant's idealism? From reliable data, proceeding thence by induction? Or from assumptions moving onward by deduction? Or from a combination of both, essentially the scientific method, the deductive method, is the scientific method applied to the systematical and methodological analyzation of written scripts? What is the best relationship between theory and empirical research? Indeed, historians can, in a sense, be objective skeptics, but do they aim at producing laws and narrating the unique secrets of events? For even if historians can use general laws derived from other fields of inquiry in the course of their historical writings, I have no problem with that. I have no problem with historians using information from other disciplines in order to produce their inquiries. And so the main title of this is actually a psychological assessment and evaluation of the philosophy of historical inquiry. But an accurate psychological assessment and evaluation concerning history needs to keep these three factors in mind. I present three. The first, being the way in which a human being states their views, is often as pertinent or as important as the content which they present. Second, the historical biography of the thinker needs to be considered. Their ideas cannot be separated from their individual lives, the historical and the social context in which they exist, and nor can the passion which with they proclaim and advance their thoughts be separated from their personal world of experiences from which it comes. And there must be biographical details, but also a psychological interpretation, if possible, of the actual figure being inquired upon. And third, what constitutes the cultural and socio-historical conditions which surround them. For example, contemplate the problems which faced European society in the post-Napoleonic period, or the cataclysm of the events of the Great War, World War I. So I approach my psychological work as an intellectual historian, and therefore abstract ideas waving across the pages of an academic book do not necessarily impress me as truthful concepts. Ideas of history are the productions of real humans, however, existing and reacting in actual situations of life. Such efforts are efforts to achieve ideas concerning the achievement of knowledge about the world. History, though, is primarily concerned with humanity's increasing historical consciousness, control of their historical nature, and the historical conditions which condition humanity's condition. What is a satisfactory explanation in history? What do we mean by causes in history? And how do we determine what they are? What constitutes adequate evidence for any claim or statement? Indeed, what is a historical fact? And by what criteria does the historian decide which facts to select as more important than other facts? History, in its basic meaning, will be found in humankind's developing historical consciousness, as I have previously said. Quote, E.H. Carr, page 164 to 65. History begins when humans begin to think of the passage of time in terms not of natural processes, the cycle of the seasons, the human lifespan, etc., but a series of specific events in which humans are consciously involved and which they can consciously influence, end quote. This, as Burckhardt pointed out, is, quote, the break with nature caused by the awakening of consciousness, end quote. Historically speaking, historical consciousness emerged out of mythology and was first largely the dominance of the Greeks, i.e. Herodotus, Thucydides, etc., and the historians who wrote the histories written by the Indians and the Chinese. But after the decline of the Roman Empire, history was recovered at the Renaissance period in the modern age. Only in the contemporary age has actual history's attempt at logical and scientifically informed understanding spread to the most other cultures. The emergence into historical consciousness of whole groups previously neglected cultures and peoples has occurred only recently in contemporary times. It has now become possible to imagine a world consisting of cultures who have entered into academic histories and become no longer the central concern of the anthropologist, but of the historian. Emergence into history and historical consciousness, which I've just previously explained, means the possibility of attempts towards logical and rational control of parts of our destiny as a human species. For complicated reasons, large parts of humankind's future will remain outside its control. For explanation on this, see P.B. Medawar on the Future of Man, a New York publication, 1959 CE. This goes over the biological inquiry concerning the human condition. Related to the concept of historical consciousness is the idea of progress. Progress in history means not only increased mastery of the natural environment in which humans exist, but also an advance in the understanding of humankind and the complex ordering of our societies. We are finally coming to realize that the counterpart of the theory of evolution in the biological world of natural science is the idea of progress in the historical world of social science. Both relate to processes which have a direction, increased differentiation, and complexity. What is missing, however, is an acceptable explanation of how the historical process takes place. What is the equivalent of a theory of natural selection in history? Regardless of the mechanism by which it occurs, humankind's historical evolution has been and is occurring in space-time. Now, the aim of history is to inquire concerning humanity's historical evolution, its progress in time, and that by doing so we shall attain increased consciousness and additional insights concerning history, and thus understanding of our own being. Thank you.